Paul. I'm sure people would want to hear more about your personal and political motivations to embark on this long-term important project, and maybe we'll get to that. But I thought a more pressing question, which we face for those of us who are interested in organizing people in resistance to the ongoing nuclear peril, why do you think it is that so many people are not more alarmed by the peril of nuclear weapons that is ever present and as dangerous as ever?
Yeah, that's kind of the question. I get why most ordinary people are not, because the media almost never talks about it. In the last presidential election campaign, the only person to mention the danger of nuclear weapons was Donald Trump. And the only reason he did it is to promote the Golden Dome. And other than that, it's a non-issue in the public discourse. Why is it a taboo is the question. And why do people go along with the taboo? It's partly what happened in the 90s, even to me, as I was saying, that when the Cold War was quote unquote supposedly over, it seemed like the danger of nuclear war was receding. In fact, it wasn't, but it felt that way. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia, there was a month or two there where it was kind of back on the agenda. People talked about it a little bit, and then from time to time, a missile goes off course and it falls in Poland, and it turned out to be a mistake, and there's another 3 days of conversation about it again, and then it goes away. The question is why in the elites, the military elites, the political elites, the financial elites, people who have access to the intelligence, who really have a more of an overview, and I'm not saying all the elites, but there's a section of the billionaire class that's relatively conscious of things, and certainly in the Pentagon and otherwise, and certainly in the arms industry. Why aren't they more concerned? Because they may think they can survive the climate crisis. I think they're wrong, but I can imagine why they think, at least for their lifetime and maybe their kids' lifetime, billionaires, will find a way to live. Nobody's surviving a nuclear war. So denial is a powerful force. Inertia is a powerful force. But I can start this answer, but it's part of a much longer answer, because you kind of asked the question right off the top. The Cold War psychology that's been drummed into our heads since 1946, 748, but also the whole mythology of America, from slavery and westward expansion on, we have been told a fabric of lies, and it's kind of natural in a way that we learn how to live this weird life where the founders of America can write a constitution and documents about liberty and the pursuit of happiness for all and own slaves. You can fight for freedom and own slaves. So how do you get your head around that? There's a kind of compartmentalization where you can just, okay, they're 3/5 human. And it's not a way to vilify these people. If you're born into those circumstances, you are taught how not to see systemic racism. You're taught to see westward expansion as moving civilization westward, taming savages, so teaching them Christianity. And much of this is all wrapped up in religious rhetoric. I mean, if Jesus ever saw what goes on in his name, especially today, he would come back. So the underpinnings of it all is economic. I've seen research that in tobacco companies that were sitting on research about cancer. They knew it caused cancer. They hid it from the public, but the executives of the companies knew. They still smoked. And they let their kids smoke, knowing it had a high chance of causing cancer. Why? Because in the corporate culture, if you didn't, you don't get ahead. So you start internalizing a rationalization. If I don't do it, somebody else will do it. Human society throughout history has this fabric of lies where the elites lie to everyone else. It's part of how human civilization evolved. It's part of how the system works. But we're somewhere new right now. What's new is these lies could end human civilization. This was never true before. You can get over World War I. You can get over World War II. But what's that line? I can't remember what it was. They're going to fight World War III with stones and arrows. Well, that's not true. There won't be a World War III. I mean, I should say no. There'll be a World War III. There'll be no World War IV because there's no humans after the next one. It's very uncomfortable to talk about. It feels overwhelming. Even in Congress, I don't know, maybe there's 10 or 20 members of Congress that actually know a damn thing about this. They vote for defense budget after defense budget with over $1 trillion now of modernization funds for new nukes. This golden con thing is going to be at least another $1 trillion, $2 trillion. Nobody knows how much it's going to cost. They're talking about another Manhattan Project, which means how much is the Golden Dome going to cost? As much as they can scare the Americans into paying. So it's the Cold War of exaggerating the enemy's power. I'm sorry, I'm into my rant, but I'll go.
No, that's good.
To get the extent and consciousness of the lies, in 1946, the CIA does a document titled, "Is the Soviet Union a military threat to Western Europe or the United States?" They do the same document with the same title in 1947, 8, 9, 50, and it continues. It's a presidential briefing. It goes to the very top levels of the political and military leadership. Every single year, and I've got the documents. I mean, it's not some big thing. They're on the CIA website. They've been declassified. Every single year they say no. There is no Soviet threat. Soviet Union's in a defensive position. And they don't tell anybody this. They tell everybody the complete opposite. The whole Cold War structure of telling Americans and the world that they're on the verge of being invaded and attacked. The Russians are coming, get in your fallout shelters, hide under your desks. It was a campaign of psychological terror, and they knew it was based on bullshit. But it helped create the justification for a whole range of what is called military Keynesianism, profit-making, and such. And the point is we're still living in that world today.
Which, if I could just add to that a bit, it was a delusion believed by virtually everyone of the hundreds of very brilliant, mostly men, working at Rand Corporation, where Ellsberg worked, as Paul pointed out, from 1958 to 1970, with a few stints in the Pentagon and the State Department. They honestly believed that the Soviet Union was hell-bent on world domination, that the Soviet Union represented a threat worse than Hitler. It was like Hitler with nukes. And they further believed in the missile gap. They believed up until 1960 that the Russians were far ahead in their nuclear arsenal. And that helped convince the American public to this day that deterrence has really worked. One answer to the initial question is, well, nuclear weapons haven't been used since 1945. So clearly, various groups having nuclear weapons has kept the peace. But Ellsberg has argued for decades that deterrence is a hoax. Because from the very beginning, American nuclear policy was based on the idea that we should have the right to use nuclear weapons first, even against a conventional military attack by the Soviet Union. And we've always prepared to have a big enough arsenal to not simply scare and intimidate and deter a first strike by the Soviet Union, but have enough capacity to effectively win a nuclear weapon, another major delusion. I'm also reminded by your comments, Paul, that one elite who didn't buy the standard company line was the commander of the Strategic Air Command when in retirement, a guy named Lee Butler. He had been in charge of all those nuclear bombers throughout the 80s. Was asked why there had never been a nuclear war. And he said, there are three reasons: the good judgment of a few people at key moments, blind luck, and divine intervention. So, I mean, and if you look at all the close calls, just Google nuclear close calls, and you'll see a shocking list of technological glitches, of false alarms, where we were this close to actually, launching nuclear weapons. It's horrific. But so the fact that it hasn't actually happened shouldn't really be reassuring at all.
I'll just add one thing. The amount of profit made from nuclear weapons is significant, but minor when you look at the entire financial picture. So who owns the companies that make nuclear weapons now? Are the asset management companies like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street? They all, if you put these big, like BlackRock alone, I think is up to now, I think it's $9 to $10 trillion under management, one company. The three of them together have more money under management. This is like pension funds giving their money to invest, sovereign wealth funds, rich people, ordinary people don't know how to invest. You give it to a Vanguard mutual fund. They just buy everything on the S&P 500, which means they own just about everything. And even though the nuclear piece of that is a thimble compared to their overall holdings, why do they risk their overall holdings for a thimble? I'm going to ask somebody, Larry Fink, who's the head of BlackRock, I'm trying to get an interview with him because I want to ask him. He says, I want to say to Larry, you say your job is to defend the assets of your investors. Shouldn't that also include defend the asses of your investors? Like, what the hell's the point? The problem is the Cold War mentality, which is where I'm going to keep harping on how everyone needs to understand the history of the Cold War. It's a layer of lies. And they're afraid that if you get honest and do something about the nuclear threat, if you pull that thread, it might pull a thread of people might start to see through, why do we need the whole military-industrial complex? Because it's all based on the same fabric of the enemy's out to get us, and we need all this to stop them. Try looking at this from the rest of the world's point of view. I can't say the only country, but the country that's done the most aggressive action since World War II is clearly the United States. Nobody comes close to whether the intervention in Korea, the Vietnam War, the Iraq War. I mean, nothing comes close. But Americans are always taught to feel under siege. They're out to get us, and they're going to take away our stuff. That's going to lead us not only to disaster from climate, which can't be separated from this issue, but if we don't get over this, what's the word, numbness, that the Cold War mentality gives us, we won't survive it.
Paul, I'll ask you one more question, and then I'll turn it over to audience questions, and maybe come back later and ask some more of my own. I'm curious about why you decided to have Dan Ellsberg be the kind of spine for the story you're telling. And I ask that because after his papers arrived at UMass, I organized a year-long seminar for 15 undergraduates and a few graduate students called, Truth and Dissent, the Life and Legacy of Daniel Ellsberg. And I was excited about it, but I wasn't sure it would really work because I knew in advance that most of my students probably knew nothing about Ellsberg. I mean, because he was briefly famous for a few years in the early 70s. They may have heard his name, maybe not. And yet, I think they were deeply engaged by his example and the opportunity. He was still alive then, so he Zoomed with the class, I think, 5 times throughout the course of the year, and they were quite taken with him. So that was my experience. I'm wondering how you came to think that this would be, Ellsberg as a person could be a key storyteller and communicator about these important issues.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, one, because he woke me up. This was not on my radar, as I said, the issue of nuclear weapons. But I'm very intrigued, in terms of who I interview and get interested in people that were on the inside and were true believers, that really believed the Cold War mythology, that believed America. Like, I think at the heart of the way Americans, and I'm a dual citizen, so for now I'll put my American hat on. I have a Canadian hat too. Americans truly have been taught, and most believe, that America does bad things for good reasons. Everybody else does bad things for bad reasons. But when we do bad, whether it's Vietnam or Iraq or you name it, we always have a good objective. We always have good intent. And because why? Because we're fighting for freedom. So sometimes you got, what is it? You got to crack eggs to get freedom. You got to kill people. You got to do this and do that. Yeah. And if you're born into that and your identity is wrapped up in that, I'm an American and we believe in freedom even if we do bad things. So I believe in freedom and I'm a good person because of that. And even though I see my country at war almost all the time, and wars that are clearly based on lies if you follow it at all, I can still get my head around we're still a good country because we do bad things for good reasons. So people like Dan, who really believed it, he was such a cold warrior, you wouldn't believe. I mean, the stuff he wrote, the memos he gave to Kennedy, beyond even Trump is not that much a cold, I mean, he's a different character, I guess. But anyway, he was such a true believer. And then over time, he woke up. And to me, it's a great story because if Ellsberg can wake up, not only wake up, stick his neck out, because it's not enough to understand. We got to be willing to stick our necks out. And he was, he decided he would risk, life imprisonment to tell people the truth about the Vietnam War. He was going to do it with the nuclear papers. So to me, he's a very, not just an important historical character in all this, but he's a way of understanding what we have to do.
And what most Americans don't know is that after the Pentagon Papers, he primarily devoted himself to anti-nuclear activism and was arrested some 80 times, carrying out acts of nonviolent civil disobedience, in most cases around nuclear issues. Thank you, Paul. Thank you all for coming out.
Can I?
You want to say something?
All right, so this up here is a way to get on our email list. So you do the QR, it takes you to a website if you want to keep track of what's happening with the film. If you actually want to do something to help us get the film out, get on the list, and in the email, let us know you'd like to help. And at some point, I'm hoping we can actually have a chapter here on university where people that want to help get the film out will stay in the loop. So if you're interested, that's that. And other than that, thanks so much.
Thanks.